It does not require a complete submission. Like I trust this process and I give myself over. It doesn't have to be that 100% surrender. And I just believe the divine works with that little spark of hope sometimes and opens a little window, just a little crack. And if you can get yourself through that crack, then you might end up solving the problem you're trying to.
Passion, inspiration, determination. Are you ready to jump into a better life? Welcome to our program, Jump Into It.
Welcome to Jump Into It, a podcast to help you prosper with purpose. And today we have an amazing guest, Maria Perry. We're so excited. She's going to offer some amazing insights. So before I have her brought on, let me properly introduce her. She is a sacred money coach, helps sensitive healers and coaches create wealth that feels safe, aligned, and rooted in their soul's purpose. As an MBA and former CPA, she brings practical money wisdom into an intuitive energy container that alchemizes past trauma, transforming it into literal and metaphysical gold. Welcome, Maria Perry, to Jump Into It.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
Awesome. So you have a very grounded background in finances. And I think that that is something that a lot of women have to embrace in order to be successful in business, to become an entrepreneur. Can you share your journey, how you went from being a CPA and very grounded in money into actually becoming a coach, and what inspired you and brought you to where you are today?
Sure. Well, I've gotten to a point in my life where I can sort of look back and see chunks of time. And I can say that the first 20 years of my working adult life were very focused on business and finance and accounting. And then some things were happening in my personal life, health matters, relationship matters, that put me on a path towards healing. Um, First myself, and then going to a school and learning about becoming a healer and a coach to other people. And so there was this 20-year period of doing that kind of work. And now I'm in this new phase of intertwining, bringing the business in and also doing healing and coaching work. And of course, it's not neatly, cut and dried, 20 years of this and 20 years of that. There's a lot of overlap. But I will say that I noticed in recent years when I was doing business coaching for healers and coaches, wanting to support holistic entrepreneurs in getting out there and doing what, their soul is calling them to do. Whenever I was giving them business advice and sort of concrete nuts and bolts steps to take, they would enthusiastically, embrace those things and promise to do them and then come back to me and say, oh no, I didn't do that yet. And I would start to notice there were these blocks happening that weren't about knowing what to do. It was more about, your emotional life or your energy field and the blocks happening there. So I've been transitioning towards supporting this same group of women in healing whatever's blocking them from creating the business success that they're trying to create.
That's very interesting because I've had a number of conversations and many guests around spiritual healing. And there's a lot of courses out there. There's a lot of charlatans out there that say, take a weekend course or, this healing and da-da, you have transformed into a new life. But as a businesswoman myself and an entrepreneur, I know that the numbers matter, that you need to be able to pay your taxes, pay your bills. And it's not just being inspired in a vision, but it's actually being grounded in that vision. So when you talk about the two worlds and then merging them, how did you will go about it so that you're talking about emotional blockage? Can you explain a little bit more about that transforms into more tactical, actionable plans?
Yeah, it's sort of an ebb and flow. So in a typical coaching program with a client, with a private client, I will start with the nuts and bolts. And it might be as simple as here's how to get a calendar set up so people can book into your calendar, or here's how to start getting payments, things like that. Um, and then knowing now from experience that they're gonna hit up against something. Something inside of them is going to kind of unconsciously get in the way. And it could be anything from someone got sick in the family, or, all of a sudden there's this big money problem and I can't focus on my new little business. It's the unconscious thing that comes up and gets in the way. And I help them to kind of see there's something happening here. You've got this aligned path, you've got this calling, what's coming up now that's blocking you from taking forward steps. Once we've identified that something is coming up, then we start to do energy healing, nervous system reprogramming, because oftentimes there's trauma history, and that trauma history has led a nervous system to adapt in a way that was useful at the time, but is now in adulthood actually not useful. And looking at ways to gently repattern the programming that got developed in maybe early life. So then we kind of get to a new place, get to the other side of that block that was identified, and we're off and running again. We're ticking things off, and what I find is there's a beginning, middle, and end. In the beginning, there's the surge of progress, and then hitting up against a block. And this happens a few times, and there's a breakthrough in the middle and another breakthrough right at the end when things are about to wrap up. So it's very ebb and flow. We kind of switch between kind of two worlds, the business world and the healing world. But it's all forward movement, and the healing isn't just for your business, it's for your whole life.
Wow. Wow. So the business kind of opens the door and saying, "Hey, I want to change my finances or my business." And then once that door is open, you really uncover all the hidden trauma or blockages that are stopping. So it's kind of like we're so multidimensional that when we're blocked, you help to define what area is being blocked that stops moving forward. And if you're able to see that when you lift that block, they're moving forward, then you know you lifted the block. And then they've
Exactly.
got that momentum. That's fantastic. So can you give us like a case study or an example of how this had worked in somebody's life?
Yeah. A person I'm thinking of is someone who experienced extreme sexual trauma, an assault that was just an awful story. She was someone who had done a lot of healing and had, a successful adult life, but was still looking to create things in terms of her um, her writing work, her healing work, and not being able to take the steps that she knew she needed to take. So even though she had already done a lot of healing, it was clear that more healing was needed, and we had to dig deeper. And we did go back to that traumatic incident and really just cleaned out what was left there to address through a combination of energy healing and really making a safe space for her to drop into the memory and, you know, relive a little bit of it, just to have a safe container where the truth of her experience could be heard and accepted. Um, and once we did that work, it was kind of miraculous. The wheels just kind of start going in motion. Everything that she's been trying to do starts to happen. And, a lot of the work for her was around her voice. And that's very common with survivors of sexual trauma. The throat chakra gets blocked.
Yeah.
So for her, there were issues around being seen and speaking her truth. And I'm getting goosebumps now just thinking about it, because she has a very thriving blog where she speaks her truth with with no no worry, no fear about being heard. And she allows herself to be seen and she's doing healing work. And it's all happening finally. And neither of us knew at the beginning, where we were going to go or what we were going to uncover, but that's the way it went.
Wow. And can you explain for our listeners when you say energy healing work, like what what do you do? Like what is that?
Yeah, I'm happy to explain it. I have been trained in a modality that is really the foundation of all the healing and coaching that I do. My teacher was Dr. Barbara Brennan, who wrote Hands of Light, which is kind of a Bible for energy healing that a lot of people knew about. In the 80s and 90s, the books are still out there and still, finding new readers. So she had a school. I went there for 4 years. I went back for advanced work almost 20 years later. Her model is a four-dimensional model that focuses on the physical body, the human aura or energy field, and then two more deeper layers that she observed, which is kind of an intentional layer. It's where your intention actually lives in your energy and anatomy, and then your core essence or your divine spark. So that's the structure of her teachings, but she really did a beautiful job of bringing in the kind of the intersection between human consciousness and this energy field that we all carry with us, and understanding that making contact with that energy field is making contact with consciousness. And that's where the work is. And, it's hands on healing, but it's also talking and knowing that there's an energy exchange happening in that talking.
Do you actually can feel the energy? Do you visual visually see the trauma or the like what it what are you experiencing as you are healing her?
Yeah, there are many ways of perceiving. Barbara taught it as high sense perception. And so you can have seeing or knowing or feeling in your body. I tend towards the knowing and the feeling in my body. I tend not to see unless sometimes if my eyes are closed, I'll get a quick flash of a vision. But normally I can't look at somebody and say, oh, on your right shoulder, I see a block. It's more of kind of a download or a knowing that comes to me. And I have been given training in a lot of skills, with my hands, but oftentimes I will just know, or my hands will just know what to do to remove the block and stabilize the field.
So your hands, what did your hands do? Do they like if do they just brush it? I guess my only experience or reference to it is Reiki healing. So is it similar to Reiki healing where you would brush around the body and figure out the blockages and try to move it with your hand kind of thing without actually physically touching the person? Is that
Similar. And I'm a Reiki master teacher. I did that before I studied this other modality. So there's, for people who know that experience of energy healing, it helps to conceptualize it that way. However, there's a whole host of other skills that are very intricate and involved, having to do with the structures of your energy body and the different levels of the energy body, and actually looking at let's say, for example, um, there's a chakra that has an issue with it, like maybe it's a little bent or torn or ripped. Um, that there are ways to repair and recenter a chakra. I'm kind of oversimplifying it, but it can give you a sense of the really kind of technical skills that can be brought in to heal trauma and other conditions.
Do you need to know what the trauma is to heal it, or just that it exists to heal it?
As a healer, I don't need to know, but I find that part of the issue is there's a repression and a reluctance to really feel the pain of the past trauma. And if the client can feel safe enough, and it can take a long time to build that safety and that trust. But when that's built, then, there's an opportunity there to make contact with the consciousness of a past wound and allow it to just flow and move. And sometimes that's enough, just the person feeling and allowing the emotions to move through their system is enough for the block to kind of flush itself out. Other times it's a joint effort with the healer and the client.
And so, like, if when we're born, I've heard the theory when you're born, you could experience trauma. And obviously, I would not, as a baby or, going through the birth canal, know to consciously that created the trauma. You don't need necessarily, is this true, be conscious of the trauma or how far back does the trauma go? Can it go past lives, past generations, past like I'm just curious at how multidimensional you define the trauma as, or is it simply when you became very conscious and have memory of yourself in this life that you release the trauma?
So, talking about the types of trauma, I do work with past life. I work with birth trauma in the womb. I'm trying to think of the word interuterine or something like that. When you're in the womb, that experience and early babyhood, when you have no words for your experience and your body is sort of recording something and something kind of gets lodged in your energy field that you have no frame of reference for. And what can happen in a healing session is, the presence of the adult healer and the adult presence of the client can hold a space. Let's say it's a baby coming through the birth canal and experiencing trauma that way. With enough safety created, the awareness of what happened can bubble up in that moment. The client may not have known that was an issue. Maybe the mother never mentioned a story about this before, or the mother's gone now and, can't tell that story. But suddenly the client is realizing or having some kind of flashback and saying, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm coming through a birth canal right now. And then we realize, okay, something's just opening up here for us to heal. So there's really no limit, to what can be healed in this way. And I've seen it all and done it all. And the training I've had has been very specific. There's training for ancestral healing, for wounds that get passed down generation to generation. There are specific techniques just for that, for example.
Wow. So you can stop the generational pain by somebody coming to you.
Yes,
So
I feel really grateful about that just in my own life, knowing that the things that I've healed have, stopped the chain of pain from passing on to generations beyond me.
if you would categorize the type of trauma, the trigger is, like you said, maybe it's poverty or inability to be successful in different realms that spark the need to address the trauma. But what types of trauma commonly are the ones that you are finding or uncovering that you're releasing? And you work mostly with women or?
Mostly, but not exclusively. I do see a lot of sexual trauma. And it got to the point where I just started marketing myself that way for a while because it's just a vast need for healing um,
Yeah.
for a lot of humans, especially women. So that's a big one. Then there's just, almost anything you can imagine. And I guess for reference, I would say um, you may be aware of the ACEs study. ACE is an acronym for Adverse Childhood Experiences. There was a study done in 1998 that looked at the link between adverse childhood experiences and adult difficulties, whether it's illness or poverty or what have you. And there was such a strong link. And the type of traumas that were looked at in that study were interesting because it wasn't only kind of the one-time shocking things, like maybe an accident or a death in the family, um, but the kind of long-term trauma of maybe having a parent who's an addict or, an abusive parent or things like where there's this long-term situation that the child cannot escape from. In either event, whether it's a sudden shock or this long-term event, what really is causing trauma is that the child's system is flooded and their ability to cope, is completely overwhelmed. And the other earmark is that there's lasting impact from that. So that's what's a trauma. The child was overwhelmed by the experience, and in adulthood, they're still having difficulties. But I think the challenge is for us as adults to recognize maybe there are things you don't remember. Maybe there are things that you do remember, but you didn't categorize it as trauma. So I think trauma awareness is really important. Educating people like that thing that happened to you actually was trauma. And, that might be part of the difficulty you're experiencing as an adult.
Yeah, because sometimes, what was acceptable in past generations and how we've been treated or treating each other is no longer acceptable today. So I think our consciousness we're becoming more aware of how sensitive we are as people and the impact it has having that lack of sensitivity. Like, you brought up two things that come to mind is addiction and ADHD. Now, there is one thought that ADHD is not genetic, but is trauma based. And if it's trauma based, then that means it can be healed. What are your thoughts about ADHD? Because everybody is now, not everybody and anybody, but a lot of people are claiming, oh, well, it's just my ADHD. And I probably have ADHD too. So I'd love to
Yeah,
get your thoughts on that.
that's a great question. I don't hold myself out as an expert on ADHD. It's crossed my path in my life, but not a lot in my practice with clients. As a amateur on this topic and just reaching into my own intuition, I do really see that connection between trauma and the behaviors that we typically classify as ADHD. Um, and there may be more to it, medically speaking, and there may be a link of the way your body coped with the trauma was, something happened in your neurology, that served you in the moment, maybe shut something down in the moment so you didn't have to, feel the enormity of what was happening. But that was kind of a lasting coping mechanism that has manifested as something that today we call ADHD.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that there's some truth to that. I really do. And also, on the same addiction, right? Where addiction is a numbing or a coping mechanism. Do you think that healing can curtail that addiction or eliminate it in people's lives?
I do. I think there is still untapped potential for this kind of healing for addiction. And, I've seen what I would call kind of mild addiction, not clinical diagnostic addiction, be eased, I'll say, by the healing. But usually the addiction is trying not to feel something that happened in the past or the reverberating pain from something that happened in the past. And so if we can open that up and let that come up to the surface and move out of the field, then the tendency to reach for a numbing agent is going to be lessened. And actually, there was a teacher at our school, at the Brennan School, that taught a specific protocol for working with addiction, having to do with like putting your hands on the head of a client and working with the left brain and the right brain and bringing balance, and it's a whole protocol, but it just opened my eyes into kind of the creative ways that addiction can be worked with.
Yeah, because addiction can fall into so many categories, right? It can fall into, addicted to shopping, addicted to sex, addicted to drugs, right? So, the blanket, it's addiction, but some people are addicted to work. Now, sometimes that doesn't look so unhealthy as opposed to other addictions. But if the source is trauma, it's trauma, right? It just branches out and manifests in different directions in one's life. And sometimes it calls more attention and more sabotaging of relationships than others do.
Yeah, and we have, cultural judgments about certain things. So in a culture that values a strong work ethic, a workaholic isn't going to look like an addict. So there's that
Yeah, they're gonna go,
cultural.
good for you, right? You know, your family doesn't know your name anymore. You never show up for family events, but good for you, and your bank account is full, right? Yeah, yeah. So, how would you, as do your clients stay with you a long time through this journey? Because I don't we are ever leave this world problem free. There's a saying that if you're problem free, then you're 6 foot under, because there's no way you're going to be problem free in this life. So at what point do you say, hey, you're good enough to go out in the world? Or is this something that you hold tight, like, and keep the relationship go? I'm imagine you don't, but I just like, at what point do you say, or do you give them healing tools so that they can continue to heal on their own?
Hmm. I usually structure my work in packages of 3, 6, 9 months. Because as I mentioned before, there's usually a beginning, a middle, and an end, and they get to have a journey. And then I think there's a need for integration time. Like, wow, we've had this journey. You've healed so much. You've had these breakthroughs. Now, take a break, integrate, focus on some other things for a while. I'm here if you need me. And we could do another one of these journeys if you like. That's my approach. Years ago, I would just work week in, week out. Okay, you want another session? Sure, let's book another session. I never had an issue of somebody kind of hanging on beyond the point that they needed the work. They usually got to that place themselves where they could see that they came to at least a resting place, if not a full conclusion. And it's true, we're never really, really done. But I do believe that certain healers and guides and therapists come into our lives more for a season, and there's probably someone else that's going to take you on the next leg of your journey at some point, healing guide for the rest of your days on earth.
Thank you for that. Does religion play into this at all? You being a healer, Maria.
Well, I am not religious anymore. I was raised in a religion and went to religious schools and all that. I have taken away from those experiences kind of core beliefs and core relationships with the divine that have never left me. Um, and that core relationship with the divine very much comes into play in my work. I have had classmates at the Brennan School and clients who come from all walks of life and have all sorts of religious beliefs. And what I find is whatever their definition is of the divine and their relationship is, it works with the energy work. And, I don't try to put anything on them. Let them bring, their belief system into the healing space. And the thing is, if you're in enough pain and you've tried enough things, you're not going to let religious beliefs stop you from getting the help you need.
So you don't necessarily need to have faith in any one religion, but just faith in the process is enough.
I believe so. I mean, I don't think you even have to have faith in the process, except up to the point where you would actually reach out to a healer and book an appointment. But from that point, if you're still skeptical, but you've shown up and you've paid for a session, there must be something, some hope there, some spark. But it does not require, a complete submission, like I trust this process and I give myself over. It doesn't have to be that 100% surrender. And I just believe the divine works with that little spark of hope sometimes and opens a little window, just a little crack. And if you can get yourself through that crack, then you might end up solving the problem you're trying to solve.
So having that, so if for a Christmas present, guess what? I ain't having it either. And he grudgingly goes because it's a present. If he doesn't have the right attitude, he's not going to be healed. Is that right?
I mean,
Showing up is not enough physically. You have to have the right mindset to be open to this, at least just somewhat. Like you're saying, not
somewhat,
100%, but at least some. Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay. So can't
yeah.
hand this out and say, "Hey, world, go get healed. Here she is. Maria's going to heal you." And then not believe in it, right? So it needs the magic of the two, the connection and the belief in the faith and the willingness.
I was going to say, there's an interesting dynamic in relationships that can happen if someone else buys you a session. It's kind of like saying you need to go fix yourself. And there could be some resistance to that if it's coming from, a spouse or another loved one. So I do think it's important you know, for the person to walk through the door themselves, to call and make the appointment themselves. It doesn't always happen that way. Um, but then it becomes a question of who wants this? Is it the spouse or the loved one, or is it the client themselves that wants this change?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, a lot of the times when we talk about in other sessions or podcasts about having the right mindset, having the right intention, this is what moves you forward. We've all been given the free will, and you can't force somebody to do something they don't want to do. But, there's always that universal law that if you throw something up in the air, it's going to land on the ground because that's gravity. So whether you believe it or you don't believe it, it's still going to land on the ground.
Very true.
So is there now, how long you've been doing this since 2009?
Yes, the financial mentoring piece, which is what I used to call it when I first started to blend these two. The energy healing I've done since 2001.
So for 2026, what guidance would you give women today that may not have the opportunity or ready to book to talk to someone? What questions that they may ask themselves that could trigger that, hey, they need this, or, they may be in a situation where this could be of value, or what would be a step that they can take to help heal themselves?
Yeah, I think part of it is recognizing that there might be something else going on, because women, especially, but all people tend to kind of punish themselves. I must be doing it wrong, or I'm bad, or I'm not meant to be successful. If you find yourself having those kind of conversations in your head, like, oh, I just can't do this, um, take a step back and consider where that voice is coming from and whether there might be some old psychological material connected to that could benefit from being looked at with a professional, whoever that might be, a therapist or a counselor or whatever you choose. I would also say if if you find yourself kind of banging your head against the wall, like I've tried this, I've tried that, I do tapping, I do Reiki, I've done all these things and I'm still not seeing the progress I'm trying to create, then you might need a really deeper dive. And maybe that's a licensed therapist who can go into that trauma with you. Maybe it's someone like me, who can bring in the energy piece for that kind of healing. And then there was one other thing I was thinking. Yeah, well, I've lost it now, so it must not be important. I
I
think,
love that. Go with the
yeah,
flow, right? It's
just let
like
it
what
go.
comes up is what's meant to be. Yeah, yeah. Don't hold on to things too long. Because at this time about New Year, everybody is looking for making a better, celebrating their life more or less, or reevaluating their life on what's working, what's not working. So this is always a good time to reevaluate. So when somebody comes to you, is it mostly emotional pain? Do you also link it to physical pain as well? Or financial pain? Like what's the common desperate hanging on, no relationship is working, or I have no money. For women today, what is their greatest pain point where they're looking for answers?
Yeah, I think it's sort of biased because I market myself as a money coach and a business coach. So I'm getting women who are trying to create financial freedom. And either it's usually a dichotomy. Either they're really on that path of building a business or starting a business, and just it's not going the way they want it to. They're not able to maybe quit the day job or leave a relationship that they're financially tied to, whatever that looks like. Then the other piece of that is, so if they're, yeah, here we go. I'm having another moment. So it seems
Okay.
like we'll just we'll stay with the money piece.
What's
It's
that?
Yeah, it's people who are trying to create that for themselves and hitting. Oh, the other piece is I do get people who are just desperate.
Yeah.
There's a financial desperation happening right in this moment. It's urgent, and it's a blessing in a sense because it's brought them to someone like me, because there's something deeper going on. So those are the two types of situations I see the most. And I often find that underneath the layers of the financial problem are the emotional problems, sometimes physical health, disease issues, and sometimes the kinds of trauma that we've talked about.
So we're just starting to ramp up here, but I have a question. I'm not sure how honest you're going to answer this question, but what success rate do you have when people come to you?
I haven't measured it, which is interesting because I'm an accountant. You might think I would. Um,
Yeah.
so if I would put it in the like 75 to 100% range of people who have, and I would define the success as forward progress towards their goals, where they were feeling stopped and they didn't know what to do next. They were able to get to the other side of that and move forward. I'm not saying I created millionaires, I'm just saying people were able to move through whatever was stopping them from taking what they knew. Most people know what they're supposed to do and what's next for them. What they don't know is what to do when they just can't get around those blocks.
Yeah. I mean, there is also money and finances is an educational thing too. I mean, we're not taught in the schools or public schools about balancing your bank account, what interest rates mean. I mean, it's not just pulling out money on the ATM, and then that's, the simplified view of how mommy and daddy get money. And so there is like once I think that well, I guess what I'm trying to say is I think that needs to go hand in hand is that once the door is open and they've released it, is that there is some tools, some practical tools out there, which it sounds like you are providing to get them there because you need to know your cash flow, you need to know your balance sheet, you need to know interest rates, you need to know some basic fundamentals around business if you're going to run a business. And so there's there's always that link. The way that I look at it is it's sort of like that balloon, right? Where you have the big balloon, the big ideas, everything, and then there's this string going down, but you got to get that string and let it land to the ground so that it's grounded on what you're doing and that you actually understand that there's profit margins, there's the return on your effort. That's my little pet peeve is not to hear enough of what women are doing or in the profession to bring people to the tactical side of things once they've had that breakthrough on how to move it to sound strategies and sound plan. And, enthusiasm and passion is important, but I have to link the two. What are your thoughts about it? Am I being too overly critical here?
No, I don't think so. As you were talking, I was thinking about a client of mine from many years ago who ran I'll call it a skincare clinic. And on the surface, it looked like this crazy successful endeavor. But she was actually on welfare. And, and what we discovered is, well, what I discovered working with her was she was she was discounting her services to the point where it was damaging the finances of the business and herself. So first is like, why are you doing that? What's the psychological reason and what can we heal here? And then it was strategies around pricing. Okay, I get that you want to help people. Why don't you have your clients give them the option to contribute to a scholarship fund so that when you have someone who's really needy, because everyone had a sob story and she would just give them free services and things like that. So she started to build a scholarship fund with money from her clients who wanted to give back. So that was an out of the box strategy that kind of satisfied her need to serve while, not damaging her personal finance and her business finance and getting her to a place where she's a match for, what looked like a very successful business.
Awesome. Yeah. And because we all have our needs around feeling a sense of contribution, but not to the point that your business can't survive. So that's an awesome. Thank you, Maria. That's an awesome example of how you can balance the two, the need for a successful business and pay your bills, but also to be a philanthropist and to help the community in other ways. So, Maria, if somebody wants to learn more about you, where do they go? How do they find out? Because I'm sure that there's going to be some people. I think I may be at that place in my life where I want to, it's 2026. I want to be open up to new ideas, new opportunities, and stop these things from holding me back, whatever they are, whatever trauma they are.
Yeah. Two ways I would recommend on social media, Facebook and Instagram. I'm at the Sacred Money Coach. I also have a website, sacred-money.com.
Yeah. I'll put it in the notes with the podcast so that people can reach out.
Great.
Again, thank you, Maria, for being a fabulous guest. Really great insights around healing and trauma and how they are closely linked and how we can get around things or move through things in order to be able to have a more successful life in 2026. Our next show, we'll have another fabulous guest whose journey is sure to inspire you. You can listen to our Jump Into It podcast on your favorite platform. We are on Spotify, iHeartRadio, and Apple Podcasts, to name a few. With the courage and clarity to bring your ideas to life, be ready to jump into it. Thank you for listening.